Floriculture greenhouse industry. This lesson is an introduction to the floriculture industry and materials commonly used in the production of flowering plants. After completing this lesson, a student will be able to describe the different products that comprise floriculture, understand floriculture's contribution to the U.S. economy, understand how seeds and cuttings are used in production, and recognize different types of containers used in the production of floriculture crops. Floriculture is a segment of horticulture that focuses on the production of flowering and foliage plants for decorative use. The floriculture industry includes several components. Crops include bedding plants, herbaceous ornamental perennial plants, potted plants, foliage plants, and cut flowers. It also includes different types of markets, as well as the manufacture and sale of production materials. We will now look at those components. Bedding plants are produced for seasonal display in flower beds and outdoor containers. Most are annual flowering plants, but also include some foliage and vegetable plants. Annuals are plants that survive only one growing season. Examples of bedding plants include petunias, violas, impatiens, home garden tomatoes and peppers, caladium, and hundreds of other species. Bedding plants are the largest segment of the floriculture industry, but have a short production and sales season. Production runs January through June, with sales in May and June for much of the U.S. Depending on species, annuals flower in the spring, summer, or fall, although some species can flower during the entire season or much of the season. There are hundreds of species used as bedding plants. Here are an example of several of those different species. Herbaceous ornamental perennials are non-woody plants that persist from year to year as parts of the original plant, such as bulbs, tubers, stems, or a crown, which is a low-growing clump of stems, or they may come back from seed. Most of these crops are propagated in greenhouses and moved outside for the rest of the production cycle. Phlox, bleeding hearts, coneflowers, columbine, and hostas are just a few of the many herbaceous flowering perennials. Whether or not a perennial survives depends on its hardiness and the hardiness zone in which it is planted. Here you see the United States Department of Agriculture, or USDA, Plant Hardiness Zone Map. The colors and number designations indicate how severe an extreme winter is in each area. Most perennial plants have been tested to determine the coldest zone in which they will survive. This information is usually provided by the seller of the plants, but can also be found in an online search. And here you have a better look at the hardiness zone map. And here we have some examples of flowering herbaceous perennials. Potted crops are mature flowering plants that are produced and sold in pots and containers. They comprise the second largest segment of floriculture. They can be produced year-round or seasonally, depending on the environmental requirements of the plants or the season with which they are associated. They are more expensive than several other types of floriculture crops because of the time it takes for plants to reach a mature flowering state. Examples of potted crops include chrysanthemums, Easter lilies, shamrocks, orchids, and many other species. And here you see some examples of potted flowering crops. Indoor foliage crops are plants that are grown for their leaves, which have an interesting shape and/or are colorful. They often are tropical or subtropical in origin. For this reason, most are produced in warm climates such as South Florida, where they can also be grown year-round in the landscape. In temperate climates, they are displayed indoors in homes, offices, and in interior scapes and atriums. They can also be used for seasonal outdoor displays in temperate zones. Bromeliads, ferns, philodendrons, pothos, and many other species comprise this group. And here is an example of several different foliage species. Cut flowers are crops that are produced with only the intention of selling the flower and not the entire plant. They can be used in several different ways, including floral arrangements, corsages, and boutonnieres. Most production for the U.S. market is now done in Central and South America. However, there is specialty cut flower production in the U.S. for cut flowers that do not ship well, or other reasons that make domestic production attractive to consumers, such as local production. Plants grown for their cut flowers include roses, baby's breath, carnations, lilies, alstroemeria, chrysanthemums, and many others. And here you see an arrangement of cut flowers and also cut roses in production. Floriculture crops can be sold wholesale or retail. They are sold by growers to many different markets, including garden centers, retail florists, large retail chains such as Walmart and Home Depot, landscapers and interior-scapers, farmers as well as farmers markets and community-supported agriculture, or CSAs. Floriculture crops have an annual wholesale value in the U.S. of over $4 billion. The chart shows the percentage that each type of crop contributes to the overall value. Cut cultivated greens are crops such as ferns that are grown for their leaves to replace in floral arrangements. We will now look at different materials and items that are used in the production of floriculture crops. Floriculture crops can be started from seeds, cuttings, or plugs. Plugs are very small seedlings or cuttings that are started in trays with small individual cells. Seeds come in many shapes and sizes. The size and shape can determine how easy or difficult it is to sow the seed by hand or machine. Pelleting difficult to sow seed can speed up the sowing process. Very tiny seeds, such as begonias, are pelleted to increase their size or reduce loss. Rough or uneven seed are pelleted to make sowing by machine possible. The vials of seed shown here have the raw seed on the bottom and the pelleted form on top. The vial on the right is begonia seed, which in its raw state is almost dust size. Pelleting is the coating of the seed with layers of talc and other materials to achieve the desired size and shape. The finished product resembles a jawbreaker candy, though much smaller. The coating can also contain nutrients, pesticides, and other materials to aid in the germinating plant. Cuttings are parts of a plant that have been removed from the plant. The part regenerates missing tissues and organs during propagation. Cuttings can be purchased either rooted or unrooted from the cutting producer. Cuttings have a limited shelf life and can generally be stored only a few days in a cooler. Cuttings are genetically identical to the plant from which they were taken. Plugs are rooted cuttings or seedlings that have been started in the small individual cells of a tray. Plugs allow for easy transplanting into larger containers later in the growing cycle. Plug trays are named for the number of cells they contain, for example, 105s, 384s, 800s, and many other sizes. Shown here are some of the different size plug trays. Transplanting is the moving of seedlings and rooted cuttings to another, usually larger container, such as a cell pack or pot. Plugs are much easier to transplant than seedlings or cuttings that have not been started in plug trays because the roots are not broken or greatly disturbed in the transplanting process. Pot size is designated by the diameter at the top of the pot. The size is stamped on the bottom of the pots, so you can tell how big they are. Cell packs are described by the number of packs per tray and the number of cells per pack. By law, the volume of all pots must be stamped on the bottom of the pot, too. This is very helpful to the grower when calculating how much media will be needed to fill the pots to be planted. Thank you for listening to this lesson. This project was funded by the United States Department of Agriculture.